Hey there, fellow Patriots. Welcome back to another episode of Patriots of the American Republic. Hopefully, everybody had a wonderful Christmas time. You know, as we approach the first year of President Trump's second term, one outspoken goal of his has been to focus on having peace throughout the world. Now, it's a large task given the nature of the desire, but an admirable task nonetheless. And in many examples, he has achieved peace for a multitude of different countries. So, for example, peace between Pakistan and India took place earlier this year. Peace between Congo and Rwanda just a couple of weeks ago. And then, obviously, a ceasefire between Israel and Hamas just a few months ago. And these are just, some of the accomplishments that he's done thus far. On the flip side, Trump hasn't been 100% peaceful. We covered his bombardment of Iranian nuclear facility just a few months ago. And over the last several months, tension between the U.S. and Venezuela has been growing. And unless Nicolas Maduro doesn't step down willingly, the likelihood of military action is going to be inevitable. Now, in the Republican Party, we seem to have a few different groups when it comes to foreign intervention. I think for the most part, many of us understand sometimes it's necessary to get involved, but there is another side, like the Lindsey Graham group, that seems like they want to get involved in everything, right? So you've got some people that say, hey, look, we understand there's times where we need to get involved and we don't need to get involved. And then you have groups that kind of want to get involved in just about everything. Those are rare. I don't think those are actual, like, regular people. I think that's a very small pocket, like the Lindsey Graham types, right? And then you have the Candace Owens and the Tucker types who have become isolationists. They seem to have an issue with us getting involved in any foreign intervention, as they expressed their disapproval of when Trump was bombing the Iranian nuclear plant, right? And we covered and we showed how Trump had been saying he would allow Iran to have the nuclear capability during the campaign trail. So this shouldn't have been a shocker to these types of folks, and yet somehow it was. And this particular group of people seems to be a large pocket of our party, right? Let's take a look at our first video.
Former Fox News host Tucker Carlson has issued a stark warning to President Trump, stating that bombing Iran would set off a war that would result in thousands of American deaths. Carlson referenced Pentagon estimates predicting significant casualties and financial costs should the U.S. become directly involved.
I don't think having an all-in or an all-out attitude is the right, thing to have, right? I think as a leader, you have to look at the situation, determine the cost and the benefit of the actions. You have to determine what's the risk to us. And obviously the cost has to be multi-layered, right? It's not just the cost financially, it's the cost of lives, et cetera, et cetera. And then you have to contrast that with what's the benefit, right? History has shown us we can't go into every single conflict. And I think Vietnam is a good example of that. But history also shows us that there are times where we can't afford not to get involved. And I think World War II would be a good example of that as well. If we had gotten involved right away, how many lives could we have saved in that World War? I mean, we waited until these groups obtained a good amount of power, and it took a larger force, and it came at a higher cost, which thankfully and fortunately we ended up winning. So I guess the better analogy I could use is when there's like a small issue with your car, like a check engine light comes on, or maybe when you start to hear that funky noise in your brakes as your brake pad wears down and it starts to thin, right? Or perhaps maybe like, the beginning of a toothache, and you kind of just ignore it because it's not that big of a deal, right? It's not that bad. And then as time progresses, the situation gets worse, right? And then it's unbearable. So then you have to do something about it, and usually it ends up costing you more. You have to do, not only the brake pad, but you have to do the entire disc itself, right? Now that now that metal has been scratching with metal, and so on and so forth. And your toothache, maybe it was something that could have been a minor procedure. Now it needed a root canal. Who knows? Who knows, right? And I'm not just saying that's in every situation, but that does happen at times. Now, in my lifetime, the US has done a good amount of regime change, and for the most part, it's been arguably unsuccessful. When we see what took place with Bush Sr. and Bush Jr., which carried over into the presidencies afterwards, like Obama, and how, he handled countries like Syria, the American people have grown tired of the trillions of dollars invested into rebuilding those countries, which at this juncture can be considered a financial loss. On top of that, let's include the tens of thousands of lives lost fighting in a country or a war that we shouldn't have gotten involved with to begin with. Now, I've stated before how I was pro-war after 9/11 regarding Afghanistan, going in and taking out Osama bin Laden. But when Bush Jr. announced we were going into Iraq, it didn't make sense to me. They lied and talked about weapons of mass destruction, right, in order to get the American people to buy in. Okay, if that's the case, many other countries have weapons of mass destruction. Were we going to go into all those countries as well and root out the terrorism? Why specifically that country? I never really bought their explanation. But these examples have given way to the isolationists like Tucker and Candace, and it's understandable when you take into consideration the amount of lies our government fed us in order to do what they did. But we do have some examples where regime change has benefited us when we look at examples like Panama and Haiti. I mean, we did regime change there under different presidents. We had a Republican president, during the Panama, and we had a Democratic one during Haiti, and we did regime change.
And look at previous presidents have had to deal with the same thing: narco trafficking, fraudulent elections. In '89, President H.W. Bush did a physical takeover of the regime in Panama just for that reason: a narco trafficker, a human trafficker, and a fraudulent election. And President Clinton did much the same in '94 in Haiti, when a dictator deposed a democratically elected president, and President Clinton wanted that president returned to power. So there's precedent for this. Congress was consulted, but neither one of those presidents, a Democrat or a Republican, sought approval from the Congress. The Congress is being consulted about this. They may disagree with it, certainly, and they have a right to do that. But I don't believe the administration is going to seek their approval. I think what we're seeing here is, yes, regime change is certainly on the table here.
When we look at the examples of regime change within our neighborhood versus the ones over in the Middle East, there seems to be a stark difference in my eyes. Given how Panama has thrived since the removal of their dictator, the people of Panama have greatly benefited from it. That being said, we have another similar situation taking place once again with the dictator Nicolas Maduro of Venezuela. Now, just to give you a little bit of background, in the 90s, Venezuela was considered the gem of South America. The richest country, predominantly due to its oil reserves, Venezuela flourished and shined. Then disaster hit as a revolutionist named Hugo Chavez entered the political arena. Chavez became friends with Fidel Castro, which many Cubans had warned. They started to warn the people of Venezuela of what this alliance could bring to their country. Many Venezuelans ignored the warnings and said, that'll never happen to our country. Our country will never fall into communism. Sadly, in about 2 decades, it most certainly has. Hugo Chavez was elected in 1998, and he died May of 2013. Upon his death, they didn't hold, another round of elections. They didn't have a VP in place. No, Hugo Chavez selected and placed Nicolas Maduro as his successor, and Venezuela continued to plunge deeper and deeper into socialism, which at this juncture has morphed into communism, just as it did for Cuba back in the 50s and 60s. Now, fast forward to July of last year, where Venezuela had their election they had an opportunity to vote Maduro out. But anyone who understands how these things work when it comes to like communism and dictators, you got to know that they don't play fair. They don't want to relinquish their power, right? They do everything legal and illegal to stay in power. History has shown us you don't vote out dictators, but the people wanted to believe that they could. There were high hopes for these elections, to be honest with you. I mean, my wife and I were tuned in. My wife was really tuned in to everything that was going on, and I was telling her, hey, come January, it's not going to happen. Dictators don't just give up their power. I mean, that's not the norm. Could there be exceptions throughout history? Sure, but that's not the norm, right? Now, opposition leaders to Nicolas Maduro anticipated the corruption and managed to obtain the evidence they needed to show that Maduro cheated and that they had won the vote and they had won the right to lead a new and free Venezuela. Nicolas Maduro, who actually controls the voting system, denied their claims and has continued to maintain his seat of power and continues to engage in narco trafficking system that he is directly involved in. Maduro now has been allowed to stay in power until Trump began to spin the wheels there back in 2016 during his first presidential victory. President Trump showed signs that Maduro was in his sights as he made a number of moves that would shape the course of the future to where we're at in present day. Now, during Trump's first administration, his DOJ indicted Maduro on narco terrorism back in March of 2020. But the president began hitting Maduro with multiple sanctions even before that. Just a quick reminder, in 2017, President Trump hit Maduro with financial sanctions for his human rights violations. I mean, there's multiple reports of political arrest, arresting your political opponents and torturing them. In 2018, with an executive order, President Trump further enhanced those financial sanctions. And in 2017, President Trump focused sanctions on the oil sector and freezing assets of Maduro's regime in order to hurt Maduro as much as possible. Now, unfortunately, President Trump lost the 2020 elections and Biden removed many of those sanctions and began to work with Maduro, which honestly helped resuscitate socialism and communism in Venezuela. In my opinion, it's because the left secretly loves socialism, which we covered in a prior video just a few months back ago. We showed the similarities between today's modern Democratic Party and the Nicolas Maduro regime and the communistic playbook, right? Now, in 2025, President Trump has refocused his sights on Venezuela, and he seems poised to finish what he started in his first term. For the last several months, President Trump has sent an armada of warships, jet fighters, and personnel to surround Venezuela. Here's a recap of major events that have taken place just this year alone that President Trump has had towards the dictator Maduro.
All right, that from yesterday at the White House now. Big story of Venezuela. Here's the recent U.S. actions there. Go back 10 months ago in February. U.S. designates TDA as a foreign terrorist organization. Then in July, the Treasury sanctions another cartel group as global terrorists. Let's come back to this in a moment. From August now, U.S. deploys major military naval assets near Venezuela. And then early September, you got the U.S. strikes on 22 smuggling boats, killing 86 people so far to date. November last month, the USS Gerald Ford, the largest in the carrier strike group, deployed off the coast of Venezuela. 3 weeks ago, the U.S. formally designates this cartel as a foreign terrorist organization. We've got more. End of November, Trump issues the warning about Venezuelan airspace. Still watching that. And then this week, the U.S. seizes that oil tanker off the coast of Venezuela. Now, we are told that tanker was bound for Iran. It was flying or sailing at sea, rather, under a Guyana flag. And it's been used many times to take illicit oil overseas. From the State Department, Tommy Pickett's with him now. And, sir, thank you for your time.
Now, this summary was from around the 10th of this month. Since then, I believe we've seized 2 more additional oil tankers, if I'm not mistaken. Now, the 2 actions of blowing up the drug boats and seizing the oil tankers has left people feeling a certain type of way. And that's in both sides of the aisle, right? Not only are the Democrats criticizing President Trump, which is obvious, but there's people in the middle, libertarians like Kat Timpf, and people even on the right have criticized President Trump about this, and that's unfortunate because, people like Senator Rand Paul are openly vocalizing their concerns and their disapproval of Trump taking military actions against these narco boats. And what he's doing is inadvertently, he's giving air to the ridiculous arguments coming from the left regarding due process. Let's check it out.
All right. Well, you bring me to my next question, which is Venezuela. Obviously, you've been very focused on this. President Trump has authorized military strikes against suspected drug boats in the Caribbean. As you know, so far, more than 20 people, Senator, have been killed in 6 different strikes. Do you believe that these strikes against these suspected drug boats are legal?
No, they go against all of our tradition. You know, when you kill someone, you should know, if you're not at war, not in a declared war, you really need to know someone's name, at least. You have to accuse them of something. You have to present evidence. So all of these people have been blown up without us knowing their name, without any evidence of a crime. And for decades, if not centuries, when you stop people at sea in international waters or in your own waters, you announce that you're going to board the ship and you're looking for contraband, smuggling, or drugs. This happens every day off of Miami, but we know from Coast Guard statistics that about 25% of the time the Coast Guard boards a ship, there are no drugs. So if our policy now is to blow up every ship we suspect or accuse of drug running, that would be a bizarre world in which 25% of the people might be innocent. The other thing about these speedboats is they're 2,000 miles away from us. If they have drugs, they're probably peddling drugs to one of the islands of Trinidad or Tobago off of Venezuela. The idea that they're coming here is like, it's a huge assumption, and really shouldn't you have to present some proof? It is the difference between war and peace. In war, though, you don't ask people's name. But if they want all-out war where we kill anybody and everybody that is in the country of Venezuela or coming out, that has to have a declaration of war. It's something that is not pretty, very expensive, and I'm not in favor of declaring war on Venezuela, but the Congress should vote. The president shouldn't do this by himself.
This is a good example of why we struggle as a party. We always have, those that can't seem to get behind Trump and the MAGA movement and the agenda going on. And what they do is they inadvertently breathe life into the left and their TDS, right? Here we've got Trump trying to protect our country, and we've got, people like Rand Paul just, trying to throw a wrench in the gears. And all of a sudden now we're so hyper-focused on defending the lives of criminals and narco traffickers and people who are coming here to do us harm. And it's mind-boggling. But since we've entered this political clown world, the left has shown it defends, it's a growing list at this point, criminals over victims, illegals over citizens, terrorist organizations such as Hamas over democratically established governments such as Israel, and now we can add drug cartels to the list of their stupidity. Since President Trump surrounded Venezuela, over 20 alleged narco trafficking boats have been blown to smithereens, and the left has been having a fit over it. Because according to them, and people like Senator Rand Paul, these are human lives who deserve due process. Let's take a listen.
Okay, so for listening audience, you see the boat, you see some people on the boat. It's got 3 engines on the back. It's plowing through the waters. It's kind of a rough ride. Yours truly would be wearing my life jacket and have a life preserver around me in the moment because I'm not a good boater, specifically when it's wavy. As it would turn out, my life jacket wouldn't do anything for me because I'd be blown up like these drug cartel members were. And I have zero sympathy for them, none whatsoever. And yet the left, they're upset. Okay. We're already hearing like, what did he think he was doing? Why did he do it? Let me find it. I'm going to get you some examples. Here's the guy from Human Rights Watch, the annoying group that keeps scoring all of our corporations. And if they're not woke, they get a bad grade from Human Rights Watch. Trump admits he ordered a summary execution, the crime of murder. Drug traffickers are not combatants who can be shot on sight. They are criminal suspects who must be arrested and prosecuted. Here's the former Latin America advisor to Bernie Sanders. Why didn't we just track and interdict the vessel in U.S. waters, arrest the crew, and seize the drugs, as the U.S. Coast Guard routinely does? I cannot imagine the timing of the Venezuela boat strike has anything to do with this, and then posted a link to the Epstein story. What an idiot. Then there's this guy, Ed Krasenstein. These Krasenstein brothers are ridiculous personalities of the left online. All I can say is that I hope Trump is using actual evidence that these are actual drug traffickers and gang members in Venezuela, unlike what he did with the 280 plus immigrants whom he sent to CCOT prison for being gang members without any legitimate evidence in many cases. Taking human lives is a major thing. Does drug trafficking warrant death? Do they not understand what's actually happening in our country? To your point about the elites, like, although drug, fentanyl and all that, it's affecting everybody across classes. The Susan Wojcicki, the CEO of YouTube, which is owned by Google. I mean, this is a very rich company. Her son, unfortunately, died from a fentanyl-laced pill. I mean, it's happened across classes, but these people don't seem to understand. And I pulled this soundbite just to make the point, okay? Because does drug trafficking warrant death? Why didn't we just track and interdict the vessel? Tell it to the parents who have lost their 19-year-olds to what they thought was a Xanax and turned out to be deadly fentanyl.
The left continues to support the wrong type of people. Just like Megyn Kelly pointed out, what about the victims of these people? When these narcos, distribute their drugs, their fentanyl, and they're killing thousands of people, not just here. Let's focus there. People here in the U.S., but just people in general, right? I'm sure their drugs are not only being distributed here in the U.S., but more than likely, along the Caribbean islands, right? And so if we're putting a stop to it, what's the problem here? Oh, well, we don't know. We don't have any proof. We don't have any. Listen, our government isn't going to, spend I don't know, what does it cost to blow up to actually, shoot a missile? It's a couple of tens of thousands of dollars, I'm sure, to shoot that missile over a single boat. Trump is sending a message that he's not playing around. I've already established a barrier, if you will. And if you're stupid enough to come into the waters carrying drugs, I'm going to blow you out of the water. I don't need due process. I don't want to go through due process because we already seen what due process does to people like Abrego Kilmar Garcia. All they've done is muddy up the waters and made it so that this guy can stay here longer and not get deported. That's what the end goal is here, is to continue to, throw monkey wrenches in, slow down the Trump administration, do whatever they can to prevent Trump from essentially protecting us. And it's unbelievable. Now, it's because of actions like this that Trump has decided to use military actions to prevent the flow of fentanyl coming to the U.S. But is fentanyl the real reason that he's using military action? I mean, we just heard a Fox commentator discuss regime change, right? And I think a lot of people are noticing, and a lot of people on the left have called this is regime change, right? I mean, people in the middle, just like I mentioned, Cat Tim. So which one is it? Despite the surface level reason initially provided by the White House, in my eyes, it's regime change. Here's the thing, though. By not recognizing Nicolas Maduro as the rightful president of Venezuela and declaring him the leader of the narco and gang affiliate groups such as Tren de Aragua and Cartel de los Soles, it may allow Trump to bypass Congress if Maduro refuses to leave willingly, and it'll force Trump to use military force, right? In essence, what I'm trying to say here is that, listen, either you leave, this is Trump to Maduro, either you leave on good terms or we'll take you out. And be it that I don't recognize you as a legitimate president, but the head of a narco state, I don't need to go to Congress to take you out. I can do it on my own because you are a threat to this country, and I'm not going to war with your country. I'm having an issue directly with you, not your country, right? And I mean, this isn't new. We just covered two examples of a Republican and Democratic president bypassing Congress to do regime changes, in the 90s within my lifetime. So let's face it. Anything that Trump does or says, no matter how beneficial it is to the American people or America, the Democrats will oppose it. So it's expected that they would oppose a request from Trump to go to war, and take out Maduro. Like if Trump doesn't take this step of declaring him the head of a narco state, then what happens is and if he had to recognize him as a president, then he would have to go to Congress and ask to go to war if he wanted to. And we know they're going to say no. They're going to say no. So by doing this, it gives, Trump an ace up his sleeve, if you will. But like I said, the Democrats they'll oppose everything, and he could say, he'll cure cancer, and they'll oppose it.
Do you think the United States should be pursuing regime change with Venezuela?
No, we should be using sanctions and other tools at our disposal to punish this dictator who is violating the human rights of his civilians and has run the Venezuelan economy into the ground. But I'll tell you, we should not be waging war against Venezuela. We definitely should not be waging war without a vote of Congress.
Again, to me, and I'm going to restate this, to me it's very clear the left strategy, and it's to gum up the gears as much as possible in order to outlast the president. They want to delay things as much as possible and hopefully long enough until he leaves office. But let's be real. The left secretly, and in some cases openly, supports socialism, as they've managed to orchestrate fake protests against Trump. And if you're orchestrating a fake protest against Trump taking these actions, then by default, you're in defense of Maduro and his regime. Did you notice the guy's sweater in that video? It's undeniable the love the left has for socialism. And anyone who came from countries that have felt the sting of socialism should not, and more than likely do not, support anything that has to do with socialism. Most Venezuelans are supporting Trump's actions. And if they aren't, they should be supporting Trump's actions and the actions that he's taking right now against this regime. Now, there are lots of protests taking place where these people seem to be against what Trump is doing. But just like, the Palestinian protests from a couple of years ago, many of these people are either being paid to orchestrate this, or they don't know why the heck they're even there. I'm going to show you a video that's in Spanish, and I'll come back and I'll give you the gist of it. But I want to show you that there's a man who is from Venezuelan background, and he's supposedly at a pro-Venezuelan protest, but he can't find an actual Venezuelan there.
¿Tú eres venezolano? No, latino. No, porque yo veo la bandera de Venezuela y aquí tienes la bandera. Es una marcha latina. ¿De Venezuela? ¿Cuál es la pregunta? Pero tú eres venezolano. Somos latinos. ¿Tienes la bandera de Venezuela? Bueno, porque apoyamos a Venezuela. ¿Estás apoyando al chavismo? Estamos apoyando al chavismo. ¿Tú eres venezolano? No. Pero soy latinoamericano. ¿No eres venezolano? No. ¿Un venezolano por ahí? Allá, la que habló. Dile, llámalo porque ¿no? Hay un venezolano aquí. Allá está. Hay un venezolano por aquí. Hay un venezolano por aquí. Yo quiero hablar con un venezolano por aquí. Escucha. ¿Tú eres venezolano? ¿Ah? Claro. ¿De qué parte de Venezuela? Carabobo. ¿De Carabobo? ¿Qué parte de Carabobo? No eres venezolano. Hay un venezolano aquí. Porque tiene la bandera de Venezuela y están apoyando al chavismo, pero no hay un venezolano aquí.
La mujer de Venezuela ya...
¿Hay alguien venezolano? ¿Tú eres venezolana?
No, pero hay una persona...
Una sola persona hablando por todo un país. Estamos en Suiza.
So for those in my audience that don't understand Spanish, this Venezuelan, again, he's over in Switzerland, and he's supposed to be at an anti-imperialistic protest, which is obviously meant to be against Trump and the U.S. And we can see, right, in those videos, in those images that were captured in that video, that there are people flying the Venezuelan flag. So let's just break this down logically. If this is an anti-imperialistic protest, indirectly it's supporting the regime of Nicolas Maduro, because that's the hallmark, right? It's that we're the imperialistic Yankees, right? The left calls the United States imperialists, right? So we know by default where this protest is going. So again, if you're opposing the United States at this current juncture, specifically with its actions towards Venezuela, then indirectly you're supporting Nicolas Maduro, right? Now, what's fascinating is that out of all of the people there waving the Venezuelan flag, this actual Venezuelan had difficulties locating a Venezuelan person, which indicates that these protests, again, they're manufactured. They're not organic. They're fake. No Cuban, unless they're an actual communist, supports the communistic government of today, nor the ones prior. And likewise, no Venezuelan, unless they're a communistic socialist, should be supporting the Maduro regime, because if they did, they are literally supporting the continued oppression and lack of freedom of the Venezuelan people. Now, here is someone who is very important, who actually does support the actions of President Trump, and this individual has become a symbol of freedom for her people. And she just recently won the Nobel Peace Prize. She's a Nobel Peace Prize recipient, and her name, and she's part of the opposition leader. Her name is Maria Corina Machado. Maria has historically been known to oppose Hugo Chavez when he was in power, and Nicolas Maduro early on, and actually throughout. I mean, as you can see, right, she's part of the opposition, right? In their most recent election, she tried to run against the Maduro regime, but due to the deceptive and anti-democratic efforts by the regime, the manipulation that they did, right, they prevented her from actually being a candidate. I don't know the details, but based on what I've been able to do, they did some, I don't know, some real shady stuff, and they managed to disqualify her as a presidential candidate. So very similar to what the Democrats tried to do with Trump last year, right? So Maria joined forces with a man named Edmundo Gonzalez, who was the actual winner of last year's election. Now, unfortunately, the transfer of power never took place. And since January of this year, Maria has had to, actually since the elections, actually, Maria has actually had to go into hiding for fear of her life, while Mr. Gonzalez has had to flee the country. And if I'm not mistaken, he's over in Spain. Maria has openly thanked and supported President Trump's efforts that he's been taking to choke out Maduro and his regime. Let's take a listen.
With the U.S. increasing pressure on the regime of Venezuela's President Nicolas Maduro in the recent weeks, Nobel Peace Prize winner Maria Corina Machado is speaking out in support of the Trump administration. Now, here's what she had to say in an exclusive interview here on CBS News. This happened on Face the Nation.
Look, I absolutely support President Trump's strategy. This is a very complex criminal structure that has turned Venezuela into a safe haven of international crime and terrorist activities, starting with Russia, Iran, Cuba, Hezbollah, Hamas, the Colombian guerrilla, the drug cartels operating freely and directed in partnership with Maduro and his regime.
And keep in mind, for the past year, Machado's been living in hiding. This interview was just days after she came out of hiding to collect her prize in Norway. Now, so far, the Trump administration's military campaign has consisted of more than 20 strikes on boats from Venezuela, the seizure of an oil tanker, and most recently, strikes against Maduro's family.
This woman has been a freedom fighter for decades, and with the help of President Trump, she is one step closer to seeing her country liberated from the tyranny of the Chavez-Maduro legacy. Now, I'm sure many of you who are listening are wondering, but why do we need to get involved? We aren't the world's police, and it's not our job to get involved in everybody's business. Although I do agree with you, there are times and moments, situations, where we can't afford not to get involved, as I highlighted at the beginning of this video. Now, from an immigration standpoint, although the border has been essentially closed, a free Venezuela would stop future crossings whenever the time comes that Republicans are removed from political power. And it should also help stabilize the region, right? Unlike the Middle Eastern countries that are thousands of miles away and have a completely different culture and require major efforts in stabilizing what we would consider a normal society, Venezuela doesn't need that. U.S. involvement would be in removing the dictator and having the Maria and her administration take over and be ready to go and begin to work from day one. There's no major investment needed, no infrastructure creation, no country rebuilding, etc. A free Venezuela from the direct help of the U.S. would create a very strong economic partnership that Maria has openly spoken about and promised. Let's take a listen.
A free Venezuela, Maria, is the greatest opportunity from a security perspective and also from a business and energy perspective to the U.S. And that's what we will do. Venezuela will be free. Venezuela will be a reliable partner of the U.S. We will kick out Iranian forces and agents, the Hezbollah, that have turned Venezuela into a base, operational base of the Iranian regime. And we will build a partnership to create a security shield for the Americas, for the stability of the region, and also for the national security of the U.S. On the other hand, I want to insist from the energy perspective. Under Maduro, Venezuela's energy, oil and gas industry has collapsed. Those companies all actually operating in Venezuela are forced to partner with a criminal structure, with a drug cartel. You're giving money to Maduro, and that means giving money for the drug cartels, for the operations, and enforcing the criminal gangs like Tren de Aragua that are operating all across the continent. So President Trump's decision is the right one. We need to move forward, cut these sources flows going into the criminal Maduro structure. Remember, Maduro is the head of the Tren de Aragua, and support the heroic fight of the Venezuelan people for democracy, which I know will come very soon.
So as you just finished hearing, not only is there an economic benefit, but there's also an additional layer. Our adversaries, such as Iran, Russia, and China, have their claws sunk deep into Venezuela in multiple ways, and that is an absolute danger to us, given the goals and desires the leaders of these countries have openly expressed for several years now. Having a free Venezuela would change their influence in that area, and their bad shenanigans will be dealt a major blow.
So, look, we have to understand that now Iranian, Russian, and Chinese have operations in Venezuela, military, intelligence, and technology, only 3 hours away from Florida. And a transition to democracy will certainly dismantle this and turn Venezuela into the strongest security ally of the United States and Western democracies in the region. So this is a moment in which Maduro has to understand that the hours are running up. And certainly, if he accepts a transition, this will move further, orderly, and peacefully and faster. But it will take place regardless whatever Maduro does.
Listen, as many of you guys know, my wife is from Venezuela, and she has been ever so hopeful that Trump would, get his hands involved and begin to spin the wheels of freedom for Venezuela, despite me arguing against it. At the time, my sight was really limited to just immigration, and I would tell her, I said, listen, if he closes down the border, which I was confident that he would do, why would we need to worry about the stem of illegals entering? But that's why our president is our leader. And that's why he has a very high percentage about being right when it comes to these types of major decisions. The benefit to the U.S. is multi-layered, and it's not some type of wishful thinking as in, cases of the past regarding Middle Eastern countries. No, the benefit is direct, it's immediate, and it's realistic. In the end, guys, this video, I don't want you guys to think that I'm trying to change your mind. Oh, look, he's trying to bias him because his wife is Venezuelan and there's a bias there. No. This video isn't really meant to change your mind about U.S. involvement in anything. It's simply to provide a balanced look at these decisions. We cannot afford to get involved in every conflict, and we cannot afford not to get involved in some conflicts. This is right in our own backyard, essentially. It's right here within our own hemisphere, right? We have to assess every pro and every con imaginable and make honest decisions when doing so. Why is this important? Because evil never sleeps. And if we ignore evil, it won't just isolate itself. Like history has shown us that evil won't just take a small part of land and be like, okay, I'm satisfied with this one thing. No, evil will spread and it will continue to expand itself until eventually it knocks on our front doorsteps like it did in World War II. there's a really good phrase that I've heard, since becoming a Christian, and it's all it takes for evil to triumph is for good men to do nothing. And I think this is one of those moments where we have a group of bad actors who have aligned themselves, and their goal is to overthrow us, right? And they're doing it in multiple ways: spies, drugs, commerce, trade, right? They know they can't do it up front and full steam ahead, right? They can't do it, so they got to come from different angles. Now, one final point that I'd like to make in this video is I'd like to highlight the hypocrisy and the TDS from the left. Notice how they were screaming from the rooftops about supporting Ukraine because Vladimir Putin is a dictator and we must always be on the side of democracy. Yet, here we have President Trump on the side of democracy going up against dictator Nicolas Maduro, and for some strange reason we don't seem to see the same type of support, the same call for freedom, the same call for democracy from the left. It's just another example of how TDS skews these people's decisions and ability to critically think. Because if they were to critically think, they would be like, you know what, this is liberating the people of Venezuela from an actual dictatorship. This, even though I don't agree with Trump, this is something I can get behind and support him. But no, they don't do that. It's full-blown TDS. No matter what Trump says, no matter what Trump does, it's always going to be the opposite. And we need people like Senator Rand Paul to stand behind our president instead of standing against him and aligning himself with the stupidity of the left. But anyhow, guys, that's my video for today. Thank you so much for joining. I will see you guys in the next one. God bless you guys. God bless America. And Happy New Year to you all. See you guys in 2026. Bye-bye. God bless.